Okay, in this video, we're going to hand sew a coin bag. In order to hand sew a coin bag, you're going to need some materials, thread, 60 inches of yarn, a yarn needle, measuring tape, a marking pencil or pen, scissors, pins, a needle threader, a needle, and a pin cushion. You'll also need 2 5x5-inch squares of cotton material. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do with our 5x5 cotton squares is to make sure we can identify the right side of the fabric from the wrong side of the fabric. For this particular chevron print, I can see the pattern very well. It's standing out nice and clear and bold on my right side. So I know that this is my wrong side. And what I want to do is make sure that I'm identifying both of the right sides of my fabric, and I'm going to lay the right sides so that they are touching each other. Just like that. Next up, I am going to mark my seam allowance. What a seam allowance is the space between our cut line and our seam that we're sewing. Usually, the seam allowance is 5/8 of an inch. If you look at this measuring tape, you will see that it is divided into 8 sections. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So each one of those is 1/8 of an inch. So 5/8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 would be about right here. For the sake of our coin purse, we're going to use a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. So that's going to be 2/8, and we're going to mark our 1/4 seam allowance using the first 2 markings on our measuring tape. So we're going to line up our 0 marking, that very first line, with the edge, our cut line, and we're going to mark our 1/4 at that second marking, and I'm going to go ahead and do that all the way around, and I'll come back in just a moment to show you what the final product of that will look like. So I have finished marking my 1/4 seam allowance on 3 sides of my 5x5 cotton squares, leaving the top open. That's where my opening of my coin bag will be. My next step is going to be to pin, and I'm going to pin going parallel to my seam right along the seam allowance. Okay. So now that I've pinned all 3 sides along the seam allowance, I'm ready to begin hand sewing my back stitch. Now, of course, you can choose to use either a full back stitch or a partial back stitch. Okay, so I'm going to start with my anchor stitch. And then I'm going to work a full back stitch along my 1/4 seam allowance that I've made. Of course, the back stitch is one of the strongest hand stitches, so I'm going to make sure that I'm using my back stitch and that it's a nice tight stitch so that I'm holding my coin purse together very strongly. I'll continue sewing all 3 sides of my coin purse using the back stitch. I have finished stitching my full back stitch. Notice that I've completed each seam all the way from the start to the end on each of the 3 sides. This is going to make a nice pointed corner when I fold it over, and a very secure corner seam. Now let's move on to our next step. Turn the top down about 1/2 inch. And we can use our measuring tape to look at the 1/2 inch. Okay, that's about 1/2 inch. And what I'm going to do is finger press this to create a nice crease along my edge. And I'm going to complete a running stitch along the bottom. Now I'm ready to sew my running stitch. So I'm going to go in and out of my fabric along the bottom edge of the cut line, and I'm going to make this a nice even running stitch. I'll continue on all the way around my bag. Once you've completed your running stitch, you want to turn your coin bag right side out. And we're ready to move on to our next step. So now we're going to run our yarn. I have 60 inches of yarn, so I'm going to cut this yarn in half. I'm going to line up my ends until I get to my center. And then I'm going to cut that in half. Okay, set one of those aside. And using our yarn needle, we're going to go ahead and run our yarn through. We're going to thread our yarn needle using our needle threader. This will be the easiest way to get the yarn through. Go ahead and put it inside. And for this portion of we're going to use just a single strand. And starting with our left side, on our left side, we're going to do a running stitch above create another running stitch above the running stitch that we did with the thread. So we're going to go right over that with our yarn needle. Just like this. Make sure that it's nice and even. And we're going to keep going until we come all the way around. So now that I've done one side, I still have to continue all the way around to the other side. Now that we've run the yarn through our bag from the left side, we're going to do the same thing just above where we ran it from the left side on our right. So I'm going to work my running stitch again. Just this time I'm going above where I worked before. And I will continue this all the way to the other side. I want to make sure that I end my running stitch where I started on the right side. When you're done, you should have 2 running stitches running parallel to each other just above the running stitch that you made using your thread. To finish, you could tie a knot at the end of your yarn and your bag will be complete. However, I would like to add beads to the end of the thread, so I'm going to show you what that will look like. So if you don't want to finish your bag with just a knot, you can use beads. The easiest way is to thread your yarn back through the eye of your yarn needle and to come up with a pattern for your beads. I'm going to use 6 on this side. Yes. And once you've done that, you're going to tie a knot. And in order to tie the knot, what you want to do is take your very last bead. You want to take your yarn back through it, like so. You can adjust it to the length that you want, and after it's secured this way, you want to tie your knot. This will make sure that your beads stay on your strand and don't fall off. Your completed coin bag should look like this. You can close it by pulling on the yarn and open it again by pulling open the top.